Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and I'm joined by our COO, who's also co-hosting today, Dustin.
Hey, everybody.
And we have a very special guest today, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on the intro. We just want to welcome you here, and we're going to jump right in. We're super excited to have Gabriel Lugo speak to us about the concept of non-duality and some other amazing things. So sit back and enjoy yourself, and here we go. All right, Gabriel, well, thank you so much for joining us today on Soul Focus Radio, a New Mind podcast. And we're so excited to talk to you about non-duality. So we'd love to just start out by just getting to know you just a little bit. So just tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself, and we'll get going.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys for inviting me to do this. Like I said, I find it very refreshing to be able to have this expression about what my life is, and that includes obviously non-duality, as we'll get into, in a dialogue mode as opposed to just talking to a screen. So first of all, thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome.
In terms of my my background, for what is fitting is for anybody that can relate, I was an atheist and slash nihilist about reality for my teenagers and the majority of my adult life. And that's because I was subscribed to what I now understand to be the belief on science. And that's the materialist paradigm that everything is made out of matter or particles, and consciousness is just this one mysterious thing that we cannot talk about or have no idea. So long story short, I had an experience with plant medicine in 2019 where nothing really happened as people are used to in ceremonies with psychedelics. I seem to have which is not uncommon for people to have zero experience, but there was a change in my day-to-day life as I started to experience synchronicities, and my skeptic mind kept putting obstacles to it. And suddenly there was a point where I said, this can't be, there has to be something. And so again, my skeptical mind and my scientific background began this investigation into the nature of reality. My focus was, what is the essence of reality, and what is the information that we have? Because science has failed me in this respect. So I started to look more into metaphysics. And again, on a little long story short, this brought me into the investigation of consciousness and what's the material I have in consciousness. I discovered what you guys know about the law of one, which is a beautiful material. You just interviewed Jim McCarthy, who is a phenomenal relic, I should say, of that material, still with us. And with the law of one, I was able to make coherence of what we call the metaphysical reality. And parallel to that, I got really interested into Buddhism. And through Buddhism, I started to learn more about non-duality, which is the base of all mystical traditions. And it's not, although we associate it a lot with the Eastern philosophies, it is the essence actually of all mysticism, whether it be in our shamanic roots in the Americas or Africa, or if we talk about the Nordic mythologies, Christian mysticism. Non-duality is the basis of all mystic teachings. And so that refined even further my own investigation or seeking to what the nature of reality is. And over time, I decided, just like I've always been a scientist, to live this and to try it out and see, what is this experience of non-duality. And so I would say that I'm a work in progress in that respect, that I simply live this non-conceptual knowledge, which is something that is fascinating to me because as Western people, and Western is just a way to say modern society, we're so used to the intellect and trying to understand reality through conceptual knowledge. And that's the missing link, or the bridge that I love to make between what we know non-conceptually as non-duality and the philosophies that stem out of there. So I think that's the briefest introduction I can make of my own path in this area.
That's awesome. I want to dig just a little bit deeper. Like, you know, before you were nihilist, before you were just based in scientific, like, how were you raised? What had you already made a shift in belief system? What kind of belief systems were you raised with? And one of the reasons why we asked this question is because at Soul Focus Group, we talk a lot about shifting belief and shifting our subconscious programming. So really interested in your journey from like your earliest days through, you know, your nihilism and your scientific thought to then getting deep into the spiritual realm.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's actually a point that I missed there. And it's, I'm of Spanish background in origin. I was actually raised in Venezuela, and we were mainly Catholics there. So my family wasn't very religious, but we did go with the tradition of the Catholic Church. We'll go to church sometimes. And the Bible was something that was available to me. You know, it's something interesting because at the age of 8 or 9, when we have I think it's called the Eucharist or the communion, right? That we do when we're about that age. That's when I started to get more into the studies of the Bible and the Catholic religion. Now, it's interesting because I remember being so elated by these teachings. There was something in there, but I wasn't God to me was something that was just invisible, ineffable. And this was a moment in my life where I didn't associate with the teachings of Jesus, for example. I didn't follow Jesus. I was just interested in this whole mysterious part of what God was. And I was devoted for a couple of years at the age of 9 or 10. But then when my teenagers kicked in and I learned about science, and I started my mind just simply morphed into this intellectual coherence and congruency with observation. And there was just something that pulled me out of that. And then, of course, I learned so many things about religion that we all know about, an institution of power that just made me create that common rejection towards belief systems and spirituality in general. So I have to say for the majority of my life, I consider all spiritual traditions to be pseudoscience or just wishful thinking. So that's where my atheism and nihilism actually was sort of fostered. But it wasn't like most people see nihilism as supposed to be something that affected me internally. It was just a view of I have no idea. And because I have no proof, I cannot believe in anything. So lack of proof, lack of belief, or even capacity of living it. So that's how it impacted my adult life. And like I said, I think I strongly still hold this skepticism, and I think skepticism is a very, very healthy thing to maintain, even in the spiritual path.
Thank you, Gabriel. I really appreciate that. So I know Dustin's going to dig in a little bit deeper, but I want to be honest with you. I've studied up a little bit on non-duality. I watched a couple of your videos a little while ago, and then recently to prepare. But I don't think I have a great understanding of what it is. So as simplistically as possible, can you just kind of lay out non-duality for me?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a healthy approach to non-duality, and I would recommend that you keep it, because what I'm going to say is just concepts and philosophy. But at least the beauty of concepts and philosophies and teachings is that they point to what it is. And so in Spanish, the word for teaching is, or at least one of them is enseñar, which means to point out or to show. And I like that a lot, because that's what any non-dual teachings do. They only point So you don't look at the finger, you see, you look at what it's pointing at, and you do that internally. So non-duality is the recognition is, I think it's very important. I like to emphasize it too, that it's not a belief. It's not a philosophy, although we get philosophies out of that. We're humans. We love to philosophize. So non-duality is not a belief. It is not a philosophy. It's not a religion. I wouldn't even call it a science, but it's the basis of all self-awareness. And the basis of self-awareness is consciousness. So when we go into the investigation of what reality is, and we simply do it as the inquisitive beings that we are, we find that there is no separation, that we cannot find, despite the very strong evidence of our perceptions to have separation of what we call objects and me, the subject, there's actually no separation. And so the play of words in non-duality, it's that it is not one because one implies many. It is one without a second, is what it's trying to say. There is no two. There is no second. There is just this unified field. We can call it infinity. We have so many words for it, but that's the basis of non-duality. And again, I reiterate, it is not a belief. It's something that you can corroborate in your own experience. And that's where the investigation of what we call the self or reality or God or whatever you want to call it, that's where it goes to. And everything else that stems out of, in fact, all spirituality, all science, all philosophies, everything that we can talk about as a sort of method of learning about reality is coming out of the essence of non-duality, which is consciousness.
Thank you, Gabriel. Awesome. As you're talking, so many questions are coming up for me. A question I do want to ask you, and before I, continue on what you're talking about, but what is your, daily spiritual practice that allows you to be centered in all of the understandings you started to uncover since 2019?
That's a really good question, Dustin. And I think I want to, for people to relate, right? Because we get into these practices with a sort of goal in mind, the purpose. Why do we do it, right? And I have to say that in my path, I tried different practices into a routine. And let me just state for the record that I am a very routine-oriented person. That I recognize that's just my orientation of mind. Mm-hmm. You see, it's just the way I'm naturally programmed to be. So it doesn't have to be this way for everybody.
Right.
And I'll keep saying this, so there is the least amount of belief that we have to be one way, right? So I tried so many things in the spiritual world, and I always felt that there was something missing, and somehow I just couldn't attach to one thing, except what came out naturally, which is meditation. Now, even meditation, which is in essence the only practice that I have, or that I can call a practice, and it's actually called a non-practice because you don't do it. There's nobody doing meditation. And we can get into that more if you want to. But meditation is usually seen as an act or an activity in which you formally sit or lay down and try to do something with your mind. And I discovered that when I did that, I became even more frustrated. So meditation actually became something that I do every morning, and I can spend anything from an hour to, it depends on what my agenda has or my schedule has in plan. But in the morning, I try to reserve at least 1 hour simply to sit with whatever is happening in my mind. And my point by saying that all of this is just, it's not necessary, because I emphasize this in my teachings, you don't have to meditate formally, is that you meditate at the very least to remember what you are, to remember, to get in touch. We call it to center yourself, as you mentioned it. That's a really good word. Or to get in touch with the essence of the divine, or whatever really is our view of this spiritual feeling of what the universe is. So we're getting in touch with that. But what I like to mention is that we don't need to do that, because the meditative state is something that we can bring out into our daily activities. And this is what a lot of people report as saying, since I started meditating, I'm a lot more calm. Well, that's because you're bringing the meditative state already into your life, you see. And that is what I would say is my daily spiritual focus. And I would mention it as something that simply is in the background of my mind, and it enhances over time. And I think that's the beauty and the reward of doing this.
Beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. Thank you, Gabriel. You talked earlier about the Western world, and one of the things we understand about at least the socialization process in the Western world is that we are filled from a very early age with a lot of mass distraction, especially as we look at, like I coach a basketball team who are now 18 years old, and they're constantly on their phone, TikTok, listening to music, with certain messages. I mean, we're bombarded with so much information, right? And one of the things we know about the socialization of the Western world is that power is external, right? And so, I heard on one of your most recent videos is that, really talking about the fact that reality happens from the inside out, right? Which is really counterintuitive to the socialization process of the Western world. So how would you help anybody that's listening to this conversation right now? What steps would you help people to begin to practice again, to really begin to shift, to see that power actually flows from the inside out? Reality flows from the inside out.
Yeah, really good question. Thank you, Dustin. Nothing like our own experience to know that this is a real thing, right? As opposed to just a very inspiring possibility of viewing the world. Every one of us have seen how what we call ourselves has changed over time, and what we identify as that image of ourselves and how we describe ourselves has changed. In that change resides this essence of how what we believe we are and what we believe other people or environments or anything that we call the external world is a fashioning of our thought patterns. In other words, we believe everything that we see in the world is a belief. We believe in that. And so if we get in touch with that knowing, which is a natural thing that we do, we associate that's what the human brain does. It connects patterns and it associates these patterns into intricate ways to say, this is a person, this is a tree, this is a bad event, this is a good event. But you see, it's all coming out of our own experience and our own ability to connect these patterns. So naturally, we have what I call the compass in ourselves, which is good and bad. See, good and bad is not something that is stated somewhere. Good and bad is just what we as sovereign beings have a way to say, this is good for me, This is bad for me. We know that all in all our lives, we have changed. And in fact, in history, what was considered good is now horrible, and what was considered horrible in the past now is just good. You see? So we have this in the macroscopic scale of humanity, and we have it in the microscopic scale of a human life. So good and bad, these are the two things that we simply associate. See, it's part of our dual perception of the world. And when it's drawing our attention back to the fact that at the essence, everything is neutral. Everything is, it has to be neutral. It needs to be a fair playground for everybody. But that really who is describing the world is us. We have always been doing it. So, and this is not a way to challenge what you said, because there is a reality as to why spiritually or naturally, I would say, we see certain things as being in the wrong direction, okay? But ultimately, it is us deciding how to feel about that wrong direction. You see, it is us to see what can we do about this wrong direction. But to always remember that even what we try to do is informed by the love that is the nature of our desire to live. And that love is something that is very important to get in touch with, because it'll show you that even what you think is it's wrong in society, or what may be wrong, or is going in a wrong direction, you're seeing it out of the contrast of love, because that's our measure, that's our compass, right? So I know I'm deviating a little bit into what the essence of this neutrality, or what is called compassionate indifference, is. But that's the point in which that everything that you see is because you're creating it, and it's always changing. So in a word like you describe, we need to first keep in mind that that is just the nature of how things are. And as we approach that reality, we need to enact what is our internal love. What do we want to do, in that direction? What do we think is needed, for bringing more coherence into that? And that's, in essence, what we do as creators or co-creators.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabriel, for all that you're sharing with us. So something's coming up for me very strongly, especially in the last answer, and that is I'm starting to put together non-duality with non-attachment, because what you were just talking about is that these are neutral events, and we put meaning on them, right? And most of the meaning we put on them is an egoic meaning, not a soul meaning, and that's because we're attached to these meanings that have been given to us externally, whether that's from our childhood experiences, perhaps childhood trauma or generational trauma, whether it's sort of indoctrination, socialization, conditioning, but we get attached to the certain perceptions of reality. And so I'm starting to see there's a connection in some way between non-duality and non-attachment. Am I on the right track? And if so, could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, non-attachment is, it's one of the core principles of anybody who is wanting to live this view of a non-dual consciousness. And yeah, I would further refine the fact that, you see, there is a lot of conditioning that has happened, and that's how we naturally see the world. But especially in the past decades, or in the past century, we can see that there's been a radical change in view as to the establishment, what we are supposed to think and live and see the world. So this is not a a rebellion against that which is happening. It's just simply a higher consciousness that is coming out to say, from even not even 200 years ago, slavery. This was so common. This was just like, going to the supermarket and buying groceries or something like that. You would buy slaves. I mean, these things are happening, and there is a direction. There is actually a direction, which I mentioned in the last question, that is it's our direction of knowing what is true. That's what's going wrong. Slavery was clearly wrong, but we kept buying it. We're still in that inertia because we still consider things to be normal. I mean, we have a monetary system that is built on power. We have so many things in the social structure that we know is wrong. And it's really, like I was telling Dustin, is how do we see it? How do we see it integrated? How do we not create separation out of this and more conflict? Because that's how we tend to approach things, with more conflict. And the idea is to overthrow this system and to put a new one. Just how do we use what it is? Because it's made out of love. All of this is made out of love. How do we use it? You see, and I think that mentality is also part of the human, that's what's integrating your shadow self, is that you recognize that all these things that you are, you can't keep fighting it. You need to embrace it. You need to love it. And you need to find the power within you that is inherent in the perfection of who you are. There is a perfection there, and the only imperfection is being seen by you. And yes, it's true that there is a lot of conditioning in our lives, in our environment, our society, and those conditionings are something that we need to face. And just like in the other examples, we need to find out, what is wrong for me and what is right for me, and just keep doing what feels right. So yeah, there is going back to the non-attachment, especially non-duality, is to know that there's nothing ever to hold on to. That's the thing. When we try to hold on to something is where frustration starts, you see, and we don't notice it until it exacerbates to a point. And you see, that threshold is different for all of us. But that's the reality, is that we try to hold on to something always. But the reality is that, one, and this goes a lot deeper into what the self is, there is no actually you that can hold on to things. And B, there's nothing to hold on to. This is what's called liberation of the mind, nirvana, or simply moksha, whatever we want to call it. It's just simply the realization that this contraction that we have as a self it's an illusion. It's not really what we are. And at that moment, we have a tremendous release of energy that is, it's now able to find more coherence in what we call the manifested self, or what we actually are. And again, that goes hand in hand with non-attachment, which is, it's a realization, like I said, it's not a practice. It's a realization that there's nothing to hold on to. And when we hold on to things, and this is why I also tell my students, the people that I mentor, is that even if you listen to this voice, because you get to the point of knowing that what you essentially are is nothing, but there is an impetus, an inertia coming from you, which is that positive side, that child that wants to play and create and do things. Even when you listen to that, don't attach to it, because that will spoil the fun.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Gabriel, one of our mantras, we say that create, not fight. And creation, of course, is an act of love. And I've heard you use the word love quite a bit. And, I guess we've been in the raw material in many ways, the law of one, that contextualizes pretty much everything that you do, myself, Martin. But when you say everything is love, help the layman understand that. Help someone who's never been introduced to any of these topics. They just clicked on this conversation. What does that mean?
Sure. There's a couple of ways in which we can define it or experience it. And first, we need to recognize that life itself is love. And let me actually take a step back and clear out a little bit of what the definition for love is, because we normally associate it with liking something.
Mm-hmm.
See, I like something. Loving seems to be like a stronger version of liking.
Mm-hmm.
And because you like, you need to dislike. So that's where we get the idea that how can everything be love? And I'm not a loving person because I tend to have dislikes. I don't like people and I hate these things and whatever it is. That's not true love. Love can actually be more associated with space. You see, space has the natural quality of allowing objects to exist in itself. See, space has no discrimination for objects. It doesn't prefer certain shapes. It doesn't like specific sizes. It just allows everything. And life is the same. Now remember, we essentially are life. We call life everything that moves and changes and transforms, and the universe is life. So if we, instead of separating ourselves from what life is, we recognize that life is that, what we essentially are is life. Now, experientially, what we can see is that we have a desire to live. Everybody wants to live. Everybody enjoys living. You see, even the case of depressions in which we go into these states of suicidal thoughts, we are holding on to life. You know, what we're depressed about is that we have so many things in our mind that are not allowing us to release this love that we are. A depressed person is the most loving example that we have in society. It's just like addiction and addictive behaviors. It's just a beautiful expression of love, because it is explaining or showing how life is, and it's just something that needs to be tapped out. So love is simply life, and we are life. See, so when we go into creation, what we want to do, you see, we all have something that we love doing, and it doesn't matter what it is. You know, it doesn't have to be something creative, even if it is just watching Netflix with your family or your kid, or just spending time alone. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just the joy of doing something that you like. You see, that is what it's called, the preference of love. And that's what we say, I like this, I like that. You focus, you narrow your attention. And something that happens when you start living from this point of love is that you see that there is a limitation as to where you can invest that love. You see, when you have all the time in the world, because you are present, you have to pick, what to do. And that seems like a narrowing of all the possibilities of you can do. That is the sacrifice of creation, you see, and that is the beauty of creation at the same time. It's infinity collapsing, the infinite awareness that we are collapsing into just one focus of attention. That's what's called love. So again, and I'm going maybe a little bit deeper, but when you go into the self and you realize that what you are is essentially infinite, and you open your eyes and you see that this infinity is actually narrowing its focus on something finite, that is just pure love. That is just the beauty of creation. So again, experientially, I would say that love can be seen as simply not even thinking about it, just knowing that being alive feels like love. You see, that's the closest thing we have to experience in love, is just being alive.
So Gabriel, thank you for that answer. We're coming towards the end of our time together today. And one of the things I want to say before we end is I absolutely want us to get back together with you really soon to really dive into a very intensive conversation around the law of one and your understanding around the law of one. But the last question, I don't know if Marty, if you have any more questions, but the last question I want to ask you is, recently you said the mind is the portal to our true self. And so, of course, in this physical reality, we have all these identities of gender, race, our experiences, in childhood, the experiences we have throughout our life. We tend to wrap ourselves maybe unconsciously in those, constructed identities. But what did you mean that the mind is a portal to the true self? And what would you leave our listeners with in the realm of that notion, that the mind is a portal to the true self?
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful, beautiful question. Everything we know as objective reality is processed by the mind. In other words, we don't know anything objective that is not through perceptions, and perceptions are informing the mind always. We can see the interconnectedness of the mind and the body because our sensations are what we have to explore, what we call reality, what we call this world, this universe. And our mind is made up of these sensations. That's what I call perceptions. Perceptions is thoughts, images, and sensations. So everything we know about the world is mind. In fact, I don't know if we touch on the Kybalion in one of our chats, and that's the first principle. The first universal law is that all is mind.
Right.
And it refers to this, like we cannot fathom anything that is not mind. But especially, we touch on our modern world and Western society or Western culture, which is now global. We're very much in touch with what the mind is doing. And one of the reasons why globally, but I'll just say the Western world, again, is now interested in these philosophies of non-duality and unity and the releases, because the mind has been explored a lot. But then what is behind minds? You see, is there something that is behind minds? And when we start looking at that, we see that there needs to be something. And that's what we call consciousness. Because in essence, what the mind is, in reality, what the mind is a modulation of consciousness. So consciousness precedes the mind, you see? And since we have so much attention to the mind, we are devoted to what the mind activity is, and that's where our attention goes to. When we try to look back at the source of the mind, that's the portal that I talk about. That is the return of the mind, which is an activity. All mental fashionings are activities. It's a constant activity. But when we see what the source of this activity is, we find that there's something. Now, this something is called the void. In sunyata is the word that they use in Sanskrit. But I like what Ra says in the Law of One, that is called a plenum, which is the Latin word where we derive the word plenty. Right? It's a plenum. It's full. It's abundant. That which precedes the mind is infinite. The mind being a finite contraction of that which is infinite. So when we realize this, there is a natural desire to go back and experience that again. You see, to see how does that feel? How does that feel to return to the source of mind? Because mind is not the reality or the only thing that exists in reality. And we start exploring this consciousness, and this is where we start getting into the meditative state. We start to see that there's a consciousness that always precedes the mind. And in fact, one of the things that we notice is that we don't need the mind to explore reality. In fact, we don't need thoughts to be present, you see, and that's where we start getting more into this calm, peaceful nature that we actually are. So in essence, I would say that we're fascinated with the mental activity. That's what's happening in modern society too, because we have a lot of information. So there's a lot of there are a lot of items and things that grab our attention. See, that's mental activity. And this, of course, causes a balance now in the planet for people to go back into the other side of activity, which is rest. You see, and that rest is what we get into consciousness. So that portal is something, I'm glad you mentioned it, because it's something that we can focus our attention to. Just notice that I don't need to have thoughts to be present. See, and I can just be here. And that's going back and forth in the portal. I think and I get involved with my thoughts and I rest. You see, it's a very fun thing to do if you're aligned with this type of work and this path. So that's, in fact, one of my favorite philosophers, Jiddu Krishnamurti, said that I is the first and last freedom, because I is a thought, and it still is a thought. You see, I. And so there's a portal into existence, and it's your last freedom. And then it's a portal into yourself, which is the first freedom.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate your spirit. Beautiful spirit.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Dustin.
It's my joy. I wish we could talk all day.
Gabriel, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I wish we had more time. I agree with Dustin. We want to get you on here for some more conversations about this and other things. I just want to thank you because I think, you have really dug deep into the spiritual consciousness that we're so connected to at Soul Focus Group, and how it's not just theory, but it actually, like the way that you describe it, it feels like, oh, I could use this on a day-to-day basis in order to stop being so attached to the illusion of all of these things that we've been fed and told are real that really aren't. And instead I can start to look at the I guess holistic, really, like non-duality, I guess simplistically feels like holism. I don't know if holism is a word, but holisticness, I don't know. I'm making up words here, but just a holistic way of approaching the world, a connected way, a more circular way, and not so much of a linear way. So this feels like a path into that spiritual consciousness that's so important to what we do. So I really want to thank you for taking the time and the energy with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure for me, and it's, like I said, I enjoy being able to talk about this, because one of the things that I would mention, I think is so important for people to know that this is not complicated. This is not something that requires years of practice and discipline and reading and learning. In fact, the greatest traditions, like Zen, for example, have always emphasized that there is nothing to learn. You see, in fact, unlearning is what we learn, or that what we find out in the Tao, which is the Asian philosophy, the Chinese philosophy of non-duality. And it's not a complicated thing. It only seems complicated because we're too invested in the mind. And so we're trying to look for, as I've said, we have realized that there are waves in the pond, and these waves are disrupting the reflection that we want to see. You see, we're no longer interested in the waves and the movement. And so when we act with the mind as opposed to consciousness, it's like we're trying to smooth out the waves in the pond so we can actually see ourselves and see the pure reflection of what we are. And we know what happens when we do that. We just disturb the water more. So it seems complicated because we're used to smoothing things out, putting out a fire or something. And in this case, all we need to do is relax and see what comes out. So I like to say this all the time, that it's not a complicated thing. It's just something that we just need to get in touch with who we truly are. And from there, everything just comes out naturally.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I appreciate it. And thank you, Dustin.
Well, that was an amazing conversation. I feel honored, Dustin, that you and I had a chance to talk to Gabriel. This was it's been an incredible experience, and just adding on to everything that we're learning as part of this New Mind series.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm stuck with that which precedes mind is infinite. Kind of want to get that tattoo of that, or make a shirt of that now. Gabriel has a beautiful spirit, and I can't wait for the next time we get to talk with him and conversate and just learn and grow together.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's what being part of the Soul Focus group and the Soul Focus group way is. It's about learning. It's about growing. You've been listening to our new series called A New Mind. When we say a new mind, we're not saying there's anything wrong with your mind and that you need a new one. It's really about getting rid of the old ways of thinking and stepping into new next level thinking that will get us what we want out of life, because we've been saying what we want out of life and we haven't been getting it in all the different areas. So that's what this is about. So we thank you for being on this journey with us. Please like and subscribe this video. If you're listening on audio, like and subscribe as well if you haven't yet. Go and check out soulfocusedgroup.com. Look at all of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and just become a part of what we do and help us grow. Because this is a movement. It's a movement based in love. We love each and every one of you. We tell you that after every episode. We love each and every one of you, and we're so excited to have you on this journey with us. And with that, we just thank you for being with us. And Dustin, as always, we want everybody to stay well, stay safe, and most of all, stay soul focused.
Peace.